Hi, I'm Tony Suarez, former law professor, legislator, and your host for I Need to Know, a program of the Public Trust Network and an intersection between the law and politics, particularly has to do with issues nationally and as it affects Puerto Rico. Today, our guest is Roger Maldonado from the City Bar of New York, a partner of Smith, Bramble, and Russell, who will discuss with us his background and why the City Bar is involved. Stay with us. Welcome, Roger. Thank you so much for participating in our podcast today as part of this conference that we're trying to put together of bar associations from around the country dealing with Puerto Rico. And, I just recently learned that the City Bar of New York, which I know, of course, being a former member of the New York State Bar, I guess I'm still a member, just a retired member of the New York State Bar. But of course, I know the great reputation the City Bar has. And so if you would please introduce yourself into our audience. We're going to be talking about what you're doing. And I want people to know that he's a partner in the law firm that has an address on 6th Avenue. All right. So for those of us who are not from New York, or those of you who are not from New York, the 6th Avenue also used to be called Avenue of the Americas or the fashion district, because that's where part of the fashion district of the world was located on this avenue. And it's a beautiful avenue of New York State. And obviously, this is a very prestigious firm. So, Roger, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Anthony, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So tell me about yourself.
So as you indicated, I'm a partner at Smith, Gambrell and Russell. The law firm has roughly 400 attorneys and offices all throughout the United States and other parts of the world. The New York office has around 50 to 60 attorneys. I am a commercial litigator. Within that broad aspect of litigation, I have a subspecialty in copyright infringement work because I speak Spanish. I was drawn into representing a well-known Puerto Rican musician in a copyright infringement case many years ago, and have continued my practice since then. I now represent a series of independent record labels and music publishers involved in Latin music. And it's one of the more entertaining parts of my practice. I have been a member of the City Bar since I was in legal services. When I graduated from law school, I went to work at South Brooklyn Legal Services doing work on behalf of low-income tenants, and joined the City Bar Association then and became a member of its Housing Court Committee, and eventually became in 2017 chair of the task force on Puerto Rico, which we'll be talking about. And then in May of 2018, I became the president of the City Bar Association for a 2-year term.
Wow, and, heavy.
I'm proud to be the first Hispanic president of the City Bar Association.
This is impressive. Again, the New York State Bar. We have the New York State Bar, of course, which is a general bar. Most members of the members who are admitted to the state of New York, a member of the State Bar, which has all offices in Albany. But the City Bar has often in the past dedicated itself to members in New York City, and those were the biggest firms representing the most important of types of litigation, and therefore the most prominent and law firms in the city were members of the City Bar. At one time, it was impossible to become a member, much less president of the City Bar. And so I'm, te felicito. Really, it's a great accomplishment to yourself and to the community in general, that it's gotten to the point where we can hold someone like yourself into a most prominent position in the city of New York and among the member of our firm. So talk to me about your interest in Puerto Rico's sovereignty, because of course, this podcast, as well as the conference, is all about Puerto Rico, trying to create a national platform, because we know that Puerto Rico itself cannot vote themselves one way or the other because they have no representatives. So, and while we members of the bar don't take any position as to what Puerto Rico should be one or other, we do recognize that Puerto Rico itself can have 100 plebiscites, and it doesn't make a difference. The Supreme Court has indicated that Puerto Rico is under the guise of the territorial clause and without action by Congress, nothing will ever change in Puerto Rico. So, and I know you guys were involved with Promesa and the little blurb you sent me about what you guys are doing. And that's a perfect example of what this powerlessness that Puerto Rico has over itself. And so talk to me about your interest and how you got in that.
So to better understand why the City Bar Association created the Task Force on Puerto Rico, I need to tell you a little bit about how the City Bar committee structure works. The City Bar Association has over 150 committees and task forces, each comprised of roughly 30-some attorneys, actually, most of whom are members of the City Bar. You can have adjunct members who aren't even lawyers who have a expertise in a certain aspect of what the committee work does. The committees range in everything from animal rights to zoning. And notwithstanding the fact that it is the New York City Bar Association, the City Bar has a very big imprint on international issues. Because New York City is a center for international commerce, international transactions, the City Bar's committees also reflect that. And within the international committees, we also have several that are focused on the human rights issues, including human rights issues, not just in Puerto Rico, but across the world. And the way, when a City Bar committee issues a report, it speaks not just for the committee, but for the City Bar Association itself. And for that reason, any report to be issued by any committee within the City Bar must be approved by the president of the City Bar Association. And the way that process works is if a committee has a report, it must send a draft of that report to the president's office. And then the City Bar staff will distribute that draft to other City Bar committees that they think likely would be interested in the topic. And then based on the input from those committees and based on the content of the draft report, the City Bar president then determines whether to approve the report as written or whether there's some need to incorporate into the report some of the aspects that the other committees have raised. So in 2016, when Congress passed the Promesa legislation, several of the City Bar committees involved in international affairs and also in particular with human rights sent to the president a draft report critical of the Promesa legislation as in essence imposing on the residents of Puerto Rico a non-elected entity that was going to have an enormous determination as to how the budget and finances of Puerto Rico would be dealt with going forward. And when that draft report was distributed to other City Bar committees involved in financial affairs, those committees said, well, wait a second, given what's been going on, the fact that Puerto Rico is in default of billions of dollars worth of debt, and bondholders are quite, as of now, left holding the bag, it's not quite as simple as all that. And you also had to take into account that the Obama administration in drafting the Promesa legislation was dealing with the political reality that, one, the Supreme Court had determined that Puerto Rico could not enact its own bankruptcy act. Therefore, the only way that Puerto Rico would be able to go through a legal process to unburden itself of this enormous debt was through some sort of new legislation. And given the political realities, the only way that new legislation would pass was through some sort of oversight by an entity that was not the government of Puerto Rico, given the fact that it was the government of Puerto Rico that had borrowed all of these monies and implemented whatever the procedures were that led to the default. That is one view. I am not espousing that view as what led to the budget crisis in Puerto Rico, but it was at least something that needed to be considered. So given that discrepancy between the views of different committees within the City Bar, the then City Bar president, John Kiernan, determined to create the task force on Puerto Rico. And he asked me, at the time I was the vice president of the City Bar, he asked me to chair the task force. And the goal, not just the goal, but the mission of the task force was to bring together the diverse views of members of the City Bar Association to come up with a coordinated response to the Promesa legislation. And the initial meetings were difficult. You had attorneys. And another thing to understand about the City Bar committees, you're supposed to leave your hat at the door with respect to what you do as an attorney for your
right, because you guys proudly represent a lot of the corporate bondholders.
Exactly, and the idea is that it doesn't matter when you are a member of a committee, you work on behalf of the mission of that committee, on behalf of the mission of the City Bar Association, and not on behalf of your clients. And because of that reality, it was possible after some time to begin to get everyone on board with, well, what should we be doing with respect, what should the city bar be doing with respect to the Promesa legislation? And the initial determination was to have the task force reach out in writing to the oversight management, what was it, the board, but it's the FOM, the Federal Oversight Management Board. And to
They have another name for it on the island, okay?
yes, my family, including both of my brothers, live in Puerto Rico, so I'm well aware of
Right.
the views towards the board that are prevalent in Puerto Rico. But the city bar, the task force reached out to the board and said, look, before you make any determinations with respect to what to do regarding the budget proposals, the fact that it's a budget proposal coming from the Puerto Rico government is part of the problem. But with respect to the budget that is going to determine how services are provided in Puerto Rico and how the financial crisis was going to be dealt with, it was enormously important for the board to give an opportunity for all stakeholders to give meaningful input into the process. And to be fair to the board, they did conduct a series of hearings. Whether or not everyone was heard with equal weight is subject to debate. But our initial work was to both request and then monitor the hearing process to ensure that everyone's views were at least being given the opportunity to be addressed and heard. Then
let me just interject here, because this is a very complex issue and we cannot resolve it here. I'm honored that Roger and the city bar is willing to undertake this task, because it is overall, though, a big picture of what's going on the island, which is part of the concern of all the Puerto Rican bar associations, whether it was for New York or Illinois or Florida or the island of Puerto Rico. I just came back from El Colegio in Puerto Rico, and they're all concerned about it. Of course, they're trying to move on with the issue, because it's almost helpless situation. They cannot do anything. But the fact that the city bar, with the reputation that it has and the source, man, you're talking about the lawyers who are representing these big interests. So when they come on board and start making a statement, even the bankruptcy judge is going to take into consideration what your bar is saying vis-a-vis the relative weights. Because again, this is a topic complex, and those that are watching, some of them will be lawyers, someone may not be lawyers watching us. Just know that the Puerto Rico tried to pass its own bankruptcy law in order to try to deal with the excess debt. They had so much debt that the creditors were ready to close down the island. So when they tried to do that, because they were supposedly not covered under the normal national bankruptcy law, so they passed their own law. So that challenged that, said, you can't do that. Well, if you can't do that and we can't resolve ourselves, well, then how is done? And as Roger indicated, the Obama administration negotiated a piece of legislation that's similar to the bankruptcy code, but the people who would be administrating, like many years ago, we had the New York City that was in bankruptcy. They appoint the board or oversight board. So they appoint this oversight board, which are a private board. It's not government officials. And they will be deciding the priorities of spending on the island. Wow, that is sort of like, an interesting situation that's constitutional, and it's not. All that litigation is still pending out there as to all that. But it's all a symptom of the problem that Puerto Rico has, that it's neither here nor there on the constitutional basis. And so the Rogers Committee and the City Bar taking on this task is of immense importance, I believe, because it lays a weight to the fact that one of the most prestigious firms, bar associations, and are weighing in on this, not representing the clients or representing the people, the government of Puerto Rico, but representing as lawyers thinking of constitutionality and fairness, which is what we all have to do as lawyers, are ethically responsible to do. They were laying their weight to this argument. What they say is going to be important, ladies and gentlemen. I can tell you what they say is going to be important. So Roger, where are you with that?
Well, actually, let me go back. Based on what you just said, one of the things that the task force did was to organize in 2000. I know it was pre-pandemic. So it would have been either 2017 or 2018, a conference at the City Bar, at which we invited members of the board, its general counsel, Jaime El Curi, to participate. We invited members of the Puerto Rico government to participate. We invited professors from Puerto Rico who had strong views against the board. And we invited professors from New York who happened to be of Puerto Rican descent, who had a nuanced view of the board. And we convened a conference that filled what's known as the Great Hall. It's the large conference room in the City Bar Association's beautiful building that holds 500 and some people, and it was packed. There were protesters present. We made the affirmative decision not to exclude protesters. We asked them to not disrupt the proceedings, and by and large, they did not. But it was the purpose of the conference was to give members of the City Bar and the general public. We invited all members of the general public to participate free of charge, to give them a sense of the different views regarding the work of the board, the reasons for the board, and how the board at Puerto Rico could move forward. And it was, as can be expected, the result of the conference was not oh yes, we all agree to move forward in the following ways, but it did result in an airing of many of the issues that you just described, Anthony. The need, the fact of a non-elected, private board, not, determined by the president and other members of Congress, who the persons from Puerto Rico had no say in electing. Was
in fact, some of them may have actually had a conflict of interest, as it was developed later on. So,
right. But so that's where we were in 2017, because I know it was 2017 because it was also pre-Hurricane Maria, and Hurricane Maria changed everything. The hurricane devastated Puerto Rico. I mean, my brother, one of my brothers, has a farm in Utuado in Puerto Rico. He had no electric power for a year after Hurricane Maria. Even residents in San Juan and other municipalities had no power, had no water for months. So it was a complete disaster. So the concept of talking about managing a budget with respect to paying back bondholders and providing for essential services became almost impossible for the board to be dealing with. So for a period of time, what mattered more was, how do you get essential services and food, fuel, etc., to Puerto Rico, much more than what the board was doing with respect to the budget. So for that reason, the task force, the City Bar's task force on Puerto Rico, and many others, communicated to the Trump administration the need to exempt Puerto Rico, at least on a temporary basis, from the requirements of the Jones Act. And the way the Jones Act works is that if you are going to ship something from one port in the United States to another port in the United States, and for these purposes, Puerto Rico is considered a port, San Juan is a port in the United States, it must be done by a ship that was built by a U.S. owned company, bears the U.S. flag, and where the crew are U.S. appointed members, which makes it more expensive than if it were a ship coming from Spain or somewhere else, where you don't have all of those built-in costs already in place. So
just so you add to that argument, the largest port of business in the state of Florida is Jacksonville, and you know where its biggest client? Puerto Rico.
Well, we focus on that, and let me continue the story. So the request was to exempt Puerto Rico from the requirements of the Jones Act on a temporary basis, to allow for the importation from many different ports in the United States of fuel, food, water, everything that was not readily available because of the devastating impact of Hurricane Maria. And the result was a 10-day moratorium, at which point the city bar said, wait a second. And the task force, we went to work, and we developed a report recommending that Puerto Rico be permanently exempted from the requirements of the Jones Act. And at the time, then Senator McCain, still alive, he had been arguing for years that the Jones Act was an outdated, no longer necessary act, because when it was first enacted, it was the idea was to have this merchant marine available to the United States Navy, comprised of these private ships that would be going from one U.S. port to another. But that was at a time when both the budget and the size of the U.S. Navy was a fraction of what it is now. The U.S. Navy is unlikely to be in need of a merchant marine comprised of civilian boats to support whatever efforts it might need in any emergency. So there was a good argument that the Jones Act should have been repealed, period. But that's not what we asked for. Well, given that the U.S. Virgin Islands, another territory of the United States, were already exempt from the requirements of the Jones Act, we were saying the same should be true for Puerto Rico, and especially now, because Puerto Rico is not only in the midst of a financial crisis, it was also in the midst of what has continued to be a long recovery period from the impacts of Hurricane Maria. And the City Bar's report was actually adopted by the New York State Bar Association. They invited the City Bar to submit the report for their review and approval, which they did. And then together with the New York State Bar Association and with the support of el Colegio de Abogados y Abogadas de Puerto Rico and from the U.S. Virgin Islands, we presented the City Bar's report to the American Bar Association, which also adopted the report, calling for the permanent exemption of Puerto Rico from the requirements of the Jones Act. We then sought to align members of Congress who had a vote to support, a bill that would result in such exemption. And things were moving forward until then Governor Rosselló, Ricardo Rosselló, the son, when asked, what should we do, in essence, punted and said, we need to study further what the impacts of the Jones Act may really be on Puerto Rico. Our report, as did many others, made clear that the results were to drive up the costs of everything that was being imported into Puerto Rico. And there was no question that this is something that, were you to exempt Puerto Rico from, would benefit people in Puerto Rico across the board. Sure. And by exempting only Puerto Rico from the Jones Act, its impact even on Jacksonville would not have been that great. And that was the state of play, where we thought there was going to be movement forward on the possibility of having some movement on exempting Puerto Rico, until Governor Rosselló didn't do anything And then shortly after that, he was involved in his own crisis. And he was, upon resignation, the moment in time to have the government of Puerto Rico focus on this and do something about it passed.
Roger,
So,
this is been a fascinating topic, and I know I don't want to take you more time. And this is an introduction for all those people who are coming to our convention and as a continuing. I am so thrilled and excited to know that the first that we have a Latino Boricua in charge of the city bar. It's extremely satisfying to me, and I'm very proud of you. Secondly, that the city bar to take the interest on this is really important, because that's the way. As I've thought up of this national conference, as I've gone through at the local level, right, from president of the Puerto Rican Bar of New York to the president of the Puerto Rican Bar of Florida, to sitting as a professor thinking, how do we do this? And it's just going nowhere. I know that we have to do something. But without the input of the power players like City Bar and its members, its constituent members, nothing will happen. I really want to be part of this with you. I want to explore how perhaps this national conference, bringing out the local bars, involved with the efforts that you guys are leading, is a way of continuing the national platform. I said in my speech to Puerto Rico, the Asamblea, you guys can't do it, but we can do it because we have senators, we have congressmen, but it has to be done really with the pressure upon the local guys to make sure it happens. So the guys in Montana and Utah have to have as much pressure on Congress as that would make it happen. And so with your expertise and the members of the bar and the influence that you guys bring to the concept, I there's no bed better than you guys to take lead on this thing. I implore you that let's continue this conversation, because I would love to be able to be part of that. That we can somehow, you guys have the resources. I am doing this with shoestring budget from the clinic that I have raised money over, really working hard to make the thing happen. But you guys have the ability, and the problem is to solve the problem, to get to the point like the National Rifle Association does, or the Christian Coalition, or recently the National Association of Black Journalists. When you have a big convention and 5,000 people show up, the presidential candidates show up, and they have to pay attention. You guys can do it, and we can help you do it, and we would like to be part of it. So I hope that we continue this conversation. Roger, I want to thank you so much for being a part of this podcast here today, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Well, thank you for having invited me, and we are most open to continued cooperation to move this aspect of and all other aspects with respect to Puerto Rico's relationship with the United States and Puerto Rico's ability to manage its affairs in ways that are beneficial to all residents of Puerto Rico. It's something that the City Bar will continue to be focusing on, and we're happy to work with you to make sure that there is an appropriate basis for the government of Puerto Rico to be able to serve its people.
Thank you very much. Que Dios te bendiga.
Gracias. Igual.
Hi, if you like this content, please like and subscribe below. You don't have to be a lawyer. Just like to know what they know and how they know it. This is your place. Puerto Ricans are citizens of the United States but cannot vote for president or Congress. And only with your help will this colonial status ever end, one way or another.